I'm Ryan Olson. I'm the Director of Intelligence for Unit 42 at Palo Alto Networks. And today I'm going to be talking about connecting and visualizing data using a tool called Maltego. For anyone who isn't yet familiar with Unit 42, this is our primary mission within the company. Analyze the data available to Palo Alto Networks to identify adversaries, their motivations, resources to better understand the threats our customers face. So that means we look at a lot of data. And we have to look at a lot of data from the perspective of trying to make connections between data and trying to understand sort of what the meaning of the data is. And a lot of people sort of think about threat intelligence working like this. You put an analyst in the middle and he has a sweet mustache, and then you jam data into him, and then at the end intelligence pops out, and that's how it works. And this is not at all how it works, because it's simply not possible for a human to just sort of take all this data and put it together. Tools are critical to being able to process the information that we have, being able to turn it into something useful, to take data or information and turn it into intelligence. And what I'm talking about today is visualizing data and connecting data using Maltego. Maltego is not a tool that we make. It's a product that's built by a company out of South Africa called Paterva. I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a second. But one of the main reasons we want to visualize data is because we need to find patterns in the data. We need to be able to see beyond just the individual data points and see what is actually happening. Does anyone recognize this map of the United States? One, Josh. I talked to Josh about this yesterday. Another one. Okay, so this I'm going to jump down, make the camera guys' life hard. This is a map of the generic names for soft drinks in the United States by country. All the blue area, these are the people who call it pop. Anyone call soda pop? Soda pop? All right. From the Midwest? Yes, maybe. I'm an Iowan. I grew up right in the middle of the blue, and I called it pop my entire life. Where from? Des Moines. Anyone? Yeah? All right. Woo! Didn't think that was going to happen. I moved from Iowa out to Washington, went to college here for a little while, still called it pop. Had no idea that these regions of the country existed, that we're calling it something completely different, until I moved to Maryland and immediately had to change what I called that fizzy beverage that I was ordering. Because if you walk into a restaurant in Maryland and ask for a pop, that would sound strange. That probably sounds strange to most of you, because this is where people live. They live here, and they live here, and nobody lives here, except for a few of us, me and the guy in the back, and we call it pop. Down here, yeah, you get a lot of weirdness going on down here, because I still infrequently run into people who just call all soda Coke. But that's a thing that happens, especially near Atlanta, near sort of Coca-Cola headquarters. You get a lot of that. But then there's also all these other strange other ones, and I'm sure there's a guy in like Southwest Texas who's like, it's fizzy drink. That's what we call it. But until you were to take all this data and visualize it in this way, you'd sort of never realize that there were these regions, that there were these things happening, that St. Louis was a little island of soda, sort of nestled between Popland and Cokeland, but there it is. But most of you probably pop or soda people, soda, yeah? I converted because it was too challenging to try and not convert. To put this in the perspective of our data, the kind of threat data that we're dealing with, this is an example of some data points that we might have connected together from a piece of malware coming out of Wildfire. So we have a file name, we know when we got it, got a hash for it so we can uniquely identify it, command and control servers, and these are domains specifically and what those resolve to. Jen will recognize this because this is something she gave me. I'm not making fun of you, Jen. I'm going to use your data, though. This is easy. I can look at this, and I don't need to identify a pattern. I can look at this and understand these variables. This is 20 pages of this. Trying to find out that there's a connection between one of the indicators on this page and one of the indicators on this page while looking through 20 pages of this is incredibly challenging. And this is why visualization can be helpful. Because taking that same information and putting it into a tool like Maltego, you get this instead. So now we have all of the different hashes. You can see down at the bottom here, each of these bubbles represents a different entity. They have different types. I'm going to go into a lot more detail on how Maltego does this in a few minutes. But generally, we have groupings of things. We have over here on the left, or on the right, excuse me, 3 sort of separate chains of files that are connected to each other, along with domains and IP addresses. And on the left side, we have a big chain that's all fully connected to each other. This is the exact same data that's in these 20 pages. But you would never be able to, this you can quickly sort of see that we have these groupings. But until you visualize the data, it's not possible to do that. At a closer level within Maltego, this is what those individual entities look like. And I'm going to do a demo here in a few minutes with the actual app, so you don't need to worry too much about what this is. But each of these are individual entities. They have an icon that represents them by type. They have data associated with them, and they have links between them. Before we go into Maltego too much, Maltego's been around since 2008 or so. It was built by a company called Palo, and I can't see very well in the lights. How many of you have used Maltego? A few of you. How many of you have used Maltego but quit using Maltego because it was annoying? Most of you. Okay, so Maltego's gotten a lot better over time, but there's a couple reasons that I choose Maltego for this kind of work. One of them is the community around Maltego, and that is Maltego is not just a visualization tool. Maltego is a system for both visualizing data, but also connecting data sources together. So, like you, not all of our data is in a single database where we can go and just query all of it out in one place. If we have data over here and we have data over here, it's helpful to have a single tool which can talk to both of them, sort of do a federated search and pull that information together. Maltego is capable of that. And one of the advantages of the Maltego sort of community, people who are using the tool, writing open source transforms to be able to connect data together, is that you have more people who are contributing things which you can then use for free without having to pay anyone because it's a community effort, and be able to get access to that information. Second thing is price. Maltego is not free. Palo charges a few $700 for it per license, which might sound a little expensive, but compared to other tools in this category, which could potentially run your organization tens, hundreds, millions of dollars in some cases, Maltego is incredibly inexpensive. And it also has a community edition, which is not meant for commercial use, and it's limited by how many nodes you can have on the screen at one time. But if you want to test it out, it works great for that. So if you're considering trying this out, know right now that you don't have to immediately shell out a few $100. You can go and download Community Edition just to play around, and if you use it, then you can upgrade. The last thing is flexibility. Maltego, if I want to connect to a new data source, all of the APIs for how the system works, all the libraries are available to me to be able to write my own code to go and connect to that other database I have. And there's lots of examples you can find if you want to talk to a SQL server, or if you want to talk to another system. That's all available and things that you can go and discover. Whereas in some other instances of visualization tools, especially the high-end ones, you probably need to hire a consultant to come and like fix your data before that works, which can be really expensive. It's not ideal. So key concepts in Maltego, entities and links are the top two. And I showed you a picture before, but I just want to go into this a little more detail. The balls are entities, and the entities can be anything. There are some predefined ones like a domain or an IP address. Those are predefined. They come already installed within Maltego. But anyone can make a new entity, and you can install that into your single Maltego instance, and you can share it with other people. So Maltego, by default, doesn't have anything to represent, let's say, a malware file. There's no sort of hash representation in it. But other people have created entity packs, which include all of those additional entities, which you can just import. And if you're all using the same entities, it's easy to share one graph with another person. Entities can be linked from one to another with a relationship. Relationships are directional. They can be bidirectional, but they have text that can be associated with them. So we can say that this domain resolved to this IP address. We could put a timestamp on that if we want to. And we can also say that this email address was used to register this domain. So these are relationships, links between separate entities. A little bit more detail on how entities work. This is the same kind of graph here, but with the actual icons and with the actual text that's related to them. So we can see that this hash was using this domain as a command and control server, January 7th, 2014. This domain resolved to this IP address, January 7th, 2014. Within Maltego, there's a whole mechanism. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I do want to show you a little bit on how you can sort of view all the entities and you can import them. And then any entity also has a list of properties associated with it. So this is not just this hash necessarily, or not just this string which is associated with this domain. You can include all sorts of other data as well. So if you had whois information, that can all be included along with the domain, so that you have that additional context available. Back to our graph here, Maltego, the next concept I want to introduce is transforms. So when you have a piece of data, and we want to take that data and go talk to a server about it, or another data store that we have, for instance, doing a reverse whois lookup to say, show me all the domains that have been ever registered with this email address. we can create a transform which actually does all the work of going and getting that data and bringing it back and then jamming that node back into the graph. At that point, the transform can be written to add a new entity, create a relationship, and that can all happen automatically. So once the transform is created, the service is available. This is all a point-and-click system. So now I'm going to give you a demo of what this looks like, because it would be silly for me to try and do a presentation about a visualization tool and not show you how it works, because it's a visualization tool. All right, let me make sure that you guys can see stuff here. So I've been talking about threat data mostly, as far as how we use it, which is the primary way we use Maltego, but it's not as good from a demonstration perspective as social network data. Social networks are really, really conducive to showing entities and links, and that's what I'm going to do right now. We're going to see how well this actually works on the screen. This is actually let me start over here on the palette so you can get an idea. There's a lot of sort of components to the Maltego interface. We've got a bar at the top, which is all about how to manipulate different entities within the data. But the important thing over here is the palette. This is a list of all the entities I have installed in my Maltego instance. Down here I have a social network section, so I can pull out a specific type of entity. In this case I've got the Palo Alto Network's Twitter account, so that's what this entity itself represents. And I can perform transforms on it. This is Maltego 3.6 Chlorine. Anyone using 3.6 yet? Came out like 3 weeks ago, yeah? Interface is a little different, but it works. It's nice. They did some good stuff here. So we've got a list of all the transforms that can be performed in my system on this particular node. Or we can also right-click on this and say, let's go and find all the tweets that this person, the Palo Alto Network's Twitter account, has written. I'm going to click Run, and it just did some stuff, which is really hard to see. You can see at the bottom we have output from the transform. I went and found 50 tweets that are associated with us, basically the last 50 tweets. The reason it went for 50 is because I've got a number of results slider up here, which you can go from really, really small up to really, really big, and you can see this one's red. Because if this thing had taken every tweet that Palo Alto Networks had ever tweeted and throw this in the graph, this would not have been a fun demo. This would have been over in like an hour when it finally finished. So this is not a useful view right here, but let me zoom out a little bit. You can see all these tweets. So this we sort of have in our hierarchical view, where we have an entity, and that entity is linking to all these different tweets. And I can show you the information we have on each of these entities. If I double click on this one and view the properties, you can see that this is the name of the account, Palo Alto Networks, the UID, so the specific Twitter user ID, the URL for the profile, all the other information, where to get the image, all of that's available. But let's look at one of the tweets that we just created. I'm going to pick one completely at random. Let's see, so this one is Android flaw puts bring your own device users and companies at risk. That was tweeted at some point by Chad Burnson, who's not in the room. That's the man who controls our Twitter account. But we've got 50 other tweets here as well. I'm actually going to, one of the things that a lot of people going into Maltego, they quickly get overwhelmed sort of by the data itself, because there's a lot going on here. And part of that comes down to understanding the right way to be able to interact with entities and with the relationships between them. So one thing, this is the layout, a little bar up here. Right now we have it in this block mode, so it's going to try to organize it into this big square. Actually, just really quick, let me see if I can, that's a little bit better. I'm going to show you a different view here. This is the hierarchical view, which is going to be, anyone want to guess what's going to happen when I click this, when I have one node connected to 50 nodes right beneath it? Let's do it. Yeah, so hierarchical is going to go from top down. This is especially not useful view for this, but the circle view, which someone else had just mentioned, looks like this. So now we see that our node's in the middle. We can get a little more information on the node that pops up over here, and all of our tweets are sitting around it. And then there's sort of the, I don't even know what they call this one, I'd call it the disorganized view, where you can see everything just sort of scattered around, which is this is basically the view to try and make it as small as possible, to compress all the nodes in the smallest amount of space without overlapping with each other. All of these have their own uses. It depends on the graph that you're looking at and what you're trying to find. I'm going to show you a couple other views here in a couple minutes when I move on to the bubble view. Something that's helpful for anyone who's really manipulating a lot of Maltego graphs is this little thing right here. Right now we are in entity selection mode, but if I click on it, I'm now in link selection mode. You will, if you use Maltego at some point, want to click on a link to be able to make a change to that. So we have this link right here, and you want to change it and add notes to it, because we want to say that this was tweeted or something like that. So that's what our label's going to say, tweeted. And we can save that here, and now this link has that particular label associated with it. When you're in link selection mode, you click on links. When you're in entity selection mode, that's how you select them. Another thing that you're going to find is maybe I want to run a command across all of the tweets that just popped up here. Selecting all of those is sort of a challenge. Shift, click, click, click. Not something I want to do. But the Maltego guys, smart enough to add this select by type. We can find every single twit, which is what they call each of the individual tweets. We can select them all, and if we want to, we can right-click, and now we can run a single or a transform on each one of them. This is when we're sort of building our graph out. I'm going to select this one that is pull hashtags, and this is going to be interesting. So right now, it's going to Twitter for every single one of these, or it's actually taking the text of each one of these tweets. It's not even going out and talking to the server for it. And it's just extracting out what all the hashtags were. And now we have all these other entities which are showing up. You can see down at the bottom, this is probably difficult to see. This is the term hashtag. That's what all these new yellow entities are. So this one down here is ignite, ignite dot dot dot. It's actually ignite dot dot dot. That's not shortened for Maltego or anything. That's an interesting one someone's using. Check this one out, cybersecurity. That's another hash, just a single one hashtag that's being used. What we might want to do from this is try and say, okay, which of these 50 tweets, which ones are really the more popular ones that Palo Alto's been tweeting about? That's a place where the bubble view can be very useful. So if we zoom out on our bubble view, each of these dots is a different size based off the total number of links that are pointing to it. We can actually modify that so that the total types of links going in, the total number of links, each one are weighted in different ways. But this is a pretty useful way right here just to say, we've got one particular hashtag, IgniteConf15. That one seems to be getting a whole lot of tweets. In case you missed it, that's one that I know Chad uses quite a bit. Let's see this one down here, Android. So this is all coming out of the Android vulnerability that we announced last week. A whole bunch of tweets since we took the last 50 or so. All right, let's back up to our main view. And now we can sort of say, one of these other views might be a little more useful, the hierarchical view. We have a little bit more resolution here because we have here, each one of these sort of descending from, or this individual hashtag descending from all these tweets. So you can get a better view of that particular data. If you're like me, at some point you're using Maltego and you're saying, okay, great, now my data is all trapped in Maltego. What can I do with that? Fortunately, it's not just a visualization tool. You can view all of this information as specific entities, and you can export this into CSV, which you can put into Excel as well. And fortunately, the Maltego guys have also created a mechanism for importing data the same way. So if you currently have all your data in a CSV file or an Excel file, you can, the import is actually up here in, I think they put it in investigate. Yeah, there's an import up here somewhere, which I can't currently see due to the lights in my eyes, which will let you take in an Excel spreadsheet and just define each type of node, and it'll automatically put it all into a single graph. Which is also very, very helpful in just getting your information in. It doesn't have to be all point and click. You can import multiple files in a row. It doesn't have to be a single file that generates your graph. So I could have an existing graph and then do an import, and it'll import all of those nodes into mine. All right. So I want to show you, this is the graph that I showed earlier in the screenshot. Of the politics sort of data that we're dealing with. There will be a blog on this maybe in the next couple days, right, John? So I'm going to zoom out on this, and you can see, I showed this picture before. The colors were a little different because I made it with Maltego carbon, and now we're chlorine, and they changed colors on us. But you can see those three sort of sections where we had this set of nodes up here, unconnected from the others, and then we had this one over here, and we had this one over here. So you can imagine a lot of the value that someone might be able to get from having their data represented this way is to be able to, one, identify these patterns, but also to be able to connect this to their own internal systems. I'm going to talk in a couple minutes about how, at a high level, how Maltego's API works, because that's really where most people are going to get the most benefit. It's where Maltego moves from being a visualization tool, where it's helpful to be able to say, okay, cool, I've got my data there, I can see the pattern, to really becoming sort of a workbench where you can say, this is the place where I can go and find all the other resources that I need and draw them into one location. All right. I'm going to jump back to my slides here, and I will return to Maltego here in a minute or two. Actually, pretty soon. So Maltego has another concept that they call machines. And machines are really interesting. And it's not something that I feel like there's people who get really, really into Maltego probably use machines a lot. And the people who don't get really into Maltego probably are like, that'll never be useful to me. Let me just describe how they work. I showed you earlier when I took that individual Twitter account and then I then jumped out to the most recent 50 tweets. And then I took those and I extracted hashtags specifically from them. Machines are a way of chaining all of those actions together so that you can say, perform this task, perform this transform, take the output of that data and perform another transform on them. So this is sort of an example of that one. This is the Perturba footprint machine, which will take a domain basically to start, and it'll start mapping out what websites are associated with that domain, what DNS servers are associated with this domain, taking the IP addresses that the domain's resolved to, and mapping them to specific autonomous systems, and really with just a single click, pulling out all sorts of different information about your single starting point. So machines are something that you can use if you're regularly performing multiple tasks or a task that requires multiple steps, that you can just sort of begin them. They'll run on their own. You can run them on certain timers. And you can get a lot of value out of that just from saving you time and having to actually go and point and click. I actually want to show you a quick demo of what one of the machines, one of the more interesting machines actually looks like. So I'm going to actually go and open up a completely new graph here. And we're going to click over onto the Machines tab. I'm going to show you what the machines that are built in. This is the default machine list that comes with Maltego Chlorine. And most of these are social network related, or at least open source intelligence related. Maltego, way back in 2008 when they really began, this was an open source intelligence gathering tool. There's plugins for all sorts of data sources I'm going to show you here in a second. But they were originally going for social networks because that was really sort of the sweet spot. The one that I want to show you right now is called Tweet Analyzer. I'm going to actually open up the code for it. You can go and view this. And you can edit this, change it however you want to, add new ones. These are pretty much examples. But I'll explain what this is going to do. This is going to, on a timer, so every 5 minutes it does this, but we're only going to do it once. It's going to search on Twitter for a specific term, so that's my initial input to the machine. From there, it's going to parse out phrases from all the tweets that come back, so little specific phrases. It's going to then extract interesting words that it might be able to use to perform what it would call sentiment analysis of the data, to try and say, are all the tweets about this specific topic, are they positive? Are they negative? Are they neutral? Which can be a little bit useful, especially if we were looking at a hacktivist organization who's launching a campaign and they're using a specific hashtag to discuss how they're going to launch an attack, or at least to describe an attack they'd already launched. We might be able to use Maltego to pull all the people who are tweeting about it together, see what else they're tweeting about, and sort of guide our research in a certain direction. So this is what it looks like, but I've got to run it, and you can actually see what it does. So I'm going to say Run Machine, and I'm going to select the Tweet Analyzer. I'm going to go Next. And I'm just going to go Ignite 2015. Hashtag Ignite 2015. Hold on to your butts. Okay, so over here, we got a little, I'm going to try to expand this so you can see it a little better. This is starting. It's going and finding tweets, and it's extracting data. This is the beginning of the process. Actually, it looks like it did not get any tweets for my Ignite 2015. Let's do Ignite 15. This will be much better if it actually works. I'm going to kill that machine because I don't really want that one to start again in a minute. We'll go down to Tweet Analyzer. Okay, finding tweets. So this one's just going to keep going. And it's going to take a few minutes to run. So we can see we're getting lots of different types of data here. We started with basically a phrase. We're parsing out hashtags. We're parsing out specific URLs, specific tweets that are happening in Maltego parlance. And we have this one down here called sentiment. So the blue ones are going to be sentiments that are showing up. So this one's still running. You can see it's still extracting data. It's pulling out words, and we've completed, I think, one iteration at this point. So this is all the data that that machine was able to extract at that moment. So if I go back to bubble view, which is especially useful from this perspective, let's make this a little bit smaller so we can see. Actually, let's do this. We'll go full screen for our. You can see a bunch of things are now showing up much higher. Obviously, Ignite 15. This was the hashtag that we initially entered, sort of central to the entire graph. You can see our sentiments are showing up too. We've got positive, yay, positive. That's sort of what we want to have related to this conference. We've got neutral over here. Actually, let me just show you what a positive example looks like. Okay, spiritually full after today's session. That's a really positive tweet. That's a good example, Ryan, just randomly clicking. Let's check out a neutral tweet, because we can do that. So we're checking the properties. In this case, it was a retweet about Ignite 15. Success is uncommon, and it won't be enjoyed by the common man. Don't even know how that relates to the conference, but definitely seems a little neutral. What I really want to find is negative. Where's the negative one? So it's probably smaller up here. And let's go ahead and check out one of these. So this, I feel like, is someone just sort of latching on to the fact that this hashtag has been popular today. 7 reasons we have church buildings. Ignite 15. So that one's unrelated. This is another thing where it's helpful to, we're getting all the data back. We can identify who's actually tweeting each of these. All that data is being pulled back by the Twitter API. Some of them aren't actually related to the conference at all. Hashtags can be used by anyone they want to. I don't see a whole lot of negative ones. I had one yesterday, which was Ignite 2015 sold out, which is negative, but sort of positive. So, all right. So machines, like I said, they can have a lot of value in the right situations. So if you were, as they can also be run in loops, you can have them continuously update. If you're able to connect this to your SIM, which is certainly possible, and I'll describe a little bit about how the connectivity works in a moment, you'd be able to pull recent attacks, be able to connect it to all the other data that you have available, and produce sort of a visualization that might be helpful to your analysts looking at a big screen to identify things that might be occurring. Or if you're kind of organization which frequently deals with angry people on Twitter, another thing that can be a little bit helpful. Suddenly lots of tweets at your company which have a certain sentiment. All right, I'm going to jump back over here to PowerPoint to go into the next step on data sources. So Maltego has a whole bunch of, especially in chlorine, they just released basically a data store where you can connect automatically to free sources or sources which require an API. And this is just a group of ones which already have Maltego transforms that are available. So just as an example, Threat Connect, anyone familiar with Threat Connect? I'm sort of curious. Not you people. Yeah, okay, so a few people. So Threat Connect's a threat intelligence service, basically a system for storing threat intel data, and they put a lot of information into that, and they allow you to put your information into it as well. One of the early things they did was build a Maltego transform so that someone could use their system to visualize data. Just one example, VirusTotal, also very, very useful to be able to pull down, especially if you have a private API access for VirusTotal, to be able to pull from a single hash. You can say, show me all the AV names that are associated with this sample. It'll pull them into the graph as well. Recorded Future has great use cases for Maltego. They basically sort of parse the entire internet into lots of little nodes so that you can search for everything, which can be really, really interesting. Passive DNS data from an organization called Passive Total. The Internet Storm Center, if you want to pull down all the data they have available, they have different lists basically of malicious IP addresses, people who are scanning networks. That's all accessible. And it all happens through the Maltego API. And none of this will be useful to you if you can't connect it to your own data. Because if you're just using outside data, it's fun. It's cool to sort of see how Twitter is interacting here, but really you want to be able to put your own data into it. So the Maltego API is completely XML based, which can be a challenge. And it's one of the reasons a lot of people early on probably give up on writing Maltego transforms, because they had something that they thought was pretty simple. They're just doing a simple query, maybe converting a hash into a domain. Like that's all they want to do. And suddenly they've got to build a big XML tree and then spit another XML tree out, which is kind of annoying. But over time, in the last sort of 6, 7 years that people have been using Maltego, a bunch of APIs have popped up around it. Python, absolutely, most common thing for people to use with Maltego. I'll explain that in a second. But any programming language that can spit out XML, you can use with Maltego, as long as you can generate XML. Python specifically has the most value because there's a library called Canary, which I'm going to show you in a second, which is really sort of abstracted away all of the XML that you have to learn, all the schema that you have to learn for writing these kind of transforms for Maltego. When you go to create a specific transform, you've got to make a choice, local or remote. So if it's just me using my laptop, I can write the transform in Python. It can sit on my laptop. If it's going to make a query out to VirusTotal, my computer will go and make a query out to VirusTotal. If I have to have an API key, that's on my computer. All the data's here. It's all sort of inclusive. But if I've got a team of people who are all using the same transforms, that's when I might want to consider having a transform that's easy to distribute to somebody else. Or if I need to be able to control access to data, I might need to do something a little different. I can't just hand out all the code for the transform itself. So local transforms, they run from the local system. When you click that button to say transform, it's going to say, execute Python on this script, take that XML input, do whatever it needs to do, and spit out more XML. It's very, very simple. They're quick to set up. They're great for prototyping. If you're doing the transform locally, all of your data is private. It's not going to talk to another server. The biggest downsides of the local transforms are if your transform requires a bunch of libraries to be installed, if you're using something that needs to be on the system to be able to change the data in some way, that has to be distributed to every single person who's using the library as well. That can be a little bit of a challenge, especially to keep all those systems in sync. They're sort of a pain to update. Canary makes this a little bit easier because they basically have built an update process. But if you're just sort of distributing them, you're basically going and telling people, replace all your Python files, replace all your entities that you're using, everything. It's sort of a pain for local. You also have fewer settings with the local transforms. That little slider that I showed you earlier to go from 12 to 10,000, you don't have that control for some reason in the local transforms. That was sort of a limit that Paterva put in place. So the remote transforms are really what Paterva sees a larger group of people using. So when I made that query out to do the Twitter lookup, I was actually talking to a Paterva server. There's a Paterva server which can execute that the actual transform, which goes and talks to Twitter. It passes an API key along with that, and it goes and does the lookup and passes the data back to me. And this is what you'd probably want to use if you're going to have an organization where lots of people are going to be querying the same kinds of information. Because that way you can have a single server which is actually connected to all the data sources, rather than having to make sure that all of your firewall rules are in place to make sure that every laptop can connect to every server. For instance, if you have a MySQL server and you want people to be able to make a query to it, to be able to translate one piece of data into another one, you probably don't want to have to make sure that every single laptop has the credentials to log into that MySQL server. You'd probably rather aggregate that onto a transform server, and then the Maltego system just makes a query to it. The TDS system makes it really easy to share transforms because within Maltego I can simply say subscribe to, basically they use the terminology seed. I can give you a seed, which is a URL. You put that in, and all the transforms that are on that server automatically become available to Maltego. You have a single point of updates and configuration, and you can rate limit your users. So if you have an API that you're purchasing access to, let's say domain tools, and you pay per query in some way, you might not want someone to be able to scroll over to 10,000, right click and say, show me every single one of those, because you might burn through a lot of resources. So through a TDS, you can limit that on your side. You can say, okay, this user has hit 10,000 or whatever their limit is, and cut them off for a while. The cons in general, if you're using a public TDS server, of which there are quite a few of them, you're sending your data off to them. It's not local on your system, and that can be a bit of a concern, but you definitely have, you can make it private if you're running your own TDS. They can also be kind of expensive. I don't know what Maltego is currently charging for their TDS. They're sort of in a transition period where they were changing how their pricing works, but if you were going to get a TDS server, based off my previous experience, you're probably in the couple tens of $1,000s range to have one of those that's available to your whole organization. All right, like I said, you probably don't want to do pure XML back and forth, just because it adds a lot of complexity. Canary, this is that Python framework that I was talking about, is really the best solution for this. There is a Python library called Maltego, which is sort of fallen by the wayside. There's a basic Python library that was made by Perturba, which isn't much better than just writing the XML yourself. And then there's Canary, which basically starts with a command line of saying, I want to start a new project, and it creates all of the files necessary, and then you just have to write a tiny little bit of Python to say, change this entity into this. And all the rest of the code, whatever that might be to actually do the transformation, you write that in pure Python. And then the actual Maltego parts of it are just a couple lines, which makes life a lot simpler. It also makes it possible for you to, when you create a bundle out of a Canary distribution, you can import all of the entities with all of their icons and everything into that, so that when I build that, I can just hand it off to somebody and they can install it in their Maltego. The big downside is you still need to make sure that any local software, any libraries on the Mac that Python's going to use, that those are installed on the system. So if I were to take I've made a couple different transforms for accessing internal data within Palo networks, and if I were to just hand that to one of my teammates, if they don't have all the same libraries installed so that their Python can access them, then it's just going to fail. So that's a little bit of complexity with using local transforms along with Canary. I want to make a shout out for Malformity Labs, mainly because if you're doing any kind of work with malware analysis in Maltego, you've probably run into Malformity. And this is it's a single guy. His name is Keith. And he started building Maltego transforms. He built the one that connects to VirusTotal. He built the initial set of data of entities that will be used for malware, so a malware family, specific user agent strings, registry entries, hashes. All of these didn't exist within Maltego, and they'd be easy for an individual to create, but without sort of a standard where we're all using the same types of entities, it's hard for us to share graphs with each other. So anyone who's using Malformity can share all of these with each other, which is very, very helpful. It's built on top of Canary, so if you wanted to make modifications to it, it's pretty easy to do because you basically are just getting a big Canary bundle. All right. So that is what I've got on Maltego, but I just want to wrap up with a little bit more about visualization. So this is another graph of the United States, and this is once again, in this case, this is not pop soda Coke, but how much snow do you have to get before you close school? And you can sort of see, these people are hardcore up here. These people got a foot. Alaska, yeah, it's the snow all winter long. Hawaii, I don't know why this has data. Is it snow at all in Hawaii? Does anyone know? Yes? Do we have Hawaiians? In the mountains, okay. There's a mountainous school in Hawaii, which apparently gets snow, that if there's any snow, they close. So that's generally the data that we have there. Once again, though, this is a pattern that becomes very easy to see once it's visualized. Not so easy to see the fact that you have to have mountains, basically, along here, otherwise you're desert, you're not getting much snow. Apparently, they can take a little bit of snow in Nevada, a little bit, just a little bit in Vegas. This one might be a little bit more relevant to you all. This is, let's see, for hands for blackjack, visualized to sort of say, if you have a 7 or less, you should always hit, moving on up based off the card combination you have. This might be useful to some of you who are spending the rest of the week here. As far as resources go, these are links which are useless to you until you get the actual slides. But if you Google Maltego, you'll find the download really easily. If you Google Maltego Developer Guide, this has got better. Didn't used to be great. They've improved a lot. Maltego's been making a lot of progress in general. I definitely recommend anyone who's going to start, if you're considering writing your own transform and you know Python, take a look at this, maybe download it, and then just go to Canary. Because, yeah, it's that's not the route that I'd recommend. Links to Malformity, just Malformity and the word Canary spelled with an I. Those are the other two sort of things that are important for you to really understand, to really start using Maltego. And that is it. Any questions or any more questions on Maltego, connecting data? Yeah?
You mentioned something about connecting it to a SIM.
Yeah. So I haven't found any built-in connections for SIMs, but most SIMs have APIs in one way or another to be able to get some data out. So as long as you can access that API programmatically, and whatever you don't need to, it doesn't have to be complicated, because in general, Maltego, a transform, is saying I have a single piece of data, and I want to get back one or more pieces of data. So doing that in Canary should be pretty simple to do. But I haven't seen any public representations of that. The SIM vendors in general, I haven't seen jumping on board with creating connections for their system. But I don't see any reason why not to.
Can you use a REST API?
Yeah, you can use whatever. And really, if you can access it over any programming language, you're in good shape. Because it's really, you could compile a C program, cat XML into it, and have it spit XML back out, and Maltego can deal with it and generate new entities and relationships. Yeah?
You have to know if there's a file limit size limit for local transformers.
As far as how many things can be returned?
Like how many files can you fit? How large is the file database that you put in?
So for local transforms, the code has to be local. It can talk to a remote system though. So it just depends. I've connected to a database with hundreds of millions of malware samples in it, but the code that I wrote is a tiny little bit of Python, which is just importing, MySQLDB or whatever it is, making a query outbound and bringing it back. So it's really the data store and Maltego themselves are separate. It's really about how your code can talk to that data store. And if you were doing something, there are some local sort of transforms which will generate PDFs and things like that. They have some other sort of requirements around them, but there's no real size limitation there. If you tried to jam 10,000 objects, entities into a single graph, you're going to have a really, really slow Maltego. You're not going to want to use it anymore. That's sort of something to keep in mind. Yeah?
Palo Alto, do you guys have any transforms for querying the Palo Alto firewalls directly?
There is actually a library called PA-Mult. And I actually meant to include a link to that, and I dropped it for some reason. It was made by one of our users, actually. And it hasn't been touched for probably for about a year, but it'll at least allow you to connect from Maltego straight to your Palo Alto device or to Panorama. And you'll be able to pull like the top 10 threats, like it'll pull the report data basically, but it doesn't go a lot beyond that. But certainly the Python XML API that we have libraries available to be able to talk to the firewalls, that could easily be integrated into Maltego.
Made some privately,
Yeah.
you might have a little larger library.
Check out PA-Mult, but it's certainly, if you're working on them, we can try and get them distributed more widely, because that's something that we can try and get with the team that builds the XML, or builds the Python library that accesses the API, to just sort of include along with it, because we want to make it more accessible. Any other questions? Doesn't look like it. Thanks, everybody.